A couple of months after I started regularly binging and purging, my sister found out what I was doing and she confronted me about it. Now, I promised her I would stop, and I did for a couple of days, but then when I got the sense that she wasn't watching me as closely as before, I got back to it again. Since we shared a bathroom, it wasn't easy hiding things from her, and she found out again, and this time she not only confronted me, but she also told my parents, and they all together decided to confront me in what I describe as one of the most traumatizing events that ever happened to me. I wrote all about this experience on my Substack. If you're interested in reading about it, you can find the link to that in the description. But even with how traumatic that was, it still didn't make me stop. Actually, I just learned to hide my bulimia better. Eventually, my sister moved out and I also started attending university, and I was living at the dorms at my university. And so with no one watching over me, no one, making sure that I wasn't binging and purging, I was free to do whatever I wanted. And my bulimia quickly turned from something that I used to do to a big problem. At one point, it got so bad that I thought about asking for help. And I told my sister, very kind of like reluctantly, but I also really wanted to get it out of me. I told her that this was still going on and I was still very much struggling with bulimia. And instead of support, I got a lot of judgment. And I got this expression that I remember till this day because I saw this expression a lot that says, "What the hell is wrong with you for still doing this?" In her view, if something needed fixing, you fix it. If you're doing something to harm yourself, you stop doing it. And if not, it means that you don't care enough, as much as you say, to recover. You don't care enough to fix your problem and move on. And she was livid at me for struggling. Now, in theory, I agreed with her, but in practice, stopping binging and purging proved to be impossible. And the combination of these two, the fact that I knew that, if you want to recover, you do everything that you can to recover, but also not being able to, the combination of these two filled me with incredible shame, and it actually only made my bulimia worse. I was disgusted with myself for stuffing my face with food and binging to the point where sometimes I couldn't even stand up straight, and then, spending half of the day with my head stuck in the toilet. I hated that, but I just couldn't stop. Not doing it was not helping. Bulimia became a huge problem for me, but what I didn't know back then was that bulimia wasn't itself the problem. It was a symptom born out of a hurt place deep within me. Years later, when I understood that, I started looking for that place in an effort to, deal with it, to fix it. And that task proved to be challenging on its own. At first, I thought it was my lack of purpose that was the problem. At that point, I had already graduated from university and I was working in a dead-end job that was leading me nowhere. I had no prospects whatsoever, and I wasn't, waking up excited in the morning to work on something. And I always had a goal of having my own business and working on my own terms and making a difference in the world, doing something great. But I didn't know what that thing was. So I started freelancing, offering different services just to see what would stick. And while I would get excited about some of these ideas in the beginning, very quickly that excitement would fade away and I would find myself again without a purpose, kind of spending all my days aimlessly just doing the work, doing the bare minimum. Then I thought that the problem was my social anxiety. I struggled with social anxiety ever since I was in middle school, and it was something that really bugged me for most of my life. I hated the version of me that would get very shy, very timid, couldn't even look people in the eye when she was speaking. I would get extremely red, I would sweat all over. It was horrible. So I started working on myself. I started working and building my self-esteem. I started going to networking events to meet with people so I can, practice being in the company of others so I could get comfortable being around them. But even after all the inner work I did, even after gaining confidence and becoming extremely, comfortable talking to people and even walking up to strangers and starting conversations with them, even after that, I still didn't get over binging and purging. So I knew I had to dig deeper. And then I found out that my social anxiety wasn't actually the problem itself. The thing that caused my social anxiety is the connection that I had between my looks and my worth. I grew up in an environment that regarded looks and external validation as the highest values. There wasn't a single day when my mom didn't mention somebody else's looks, for good or bad, didn't comment on my thighs, my stomach, my looks, and compared me to other girls. It seemed like beauty was the only thing that was important in life, and I internalized that belief and I held on to it for a very long time. And since I didn't look like the girls and women that my mom deemed beautiful, I also understood that I would never be considered beautiful, and because of that, I will never be accepted, valued, or loved. Back then, I spent a lot of time with my mom and the people that she chose to surround herself with, naturally people that held the same opinions as hers, and so I was constantly judged, scrutinized, commented on by everyone. No wonder I had social anxiety. I eventually realized that just because my mom and her friends thought a certain way, it doesn't mean that the whole world holds the same beliefs as them. I realized that whatever they thought was just a story that they were telling themselves, and I didn't have to accept it as my own. And I decided to write my own story. Detangling my looks from my worth, while extremely hard, because again, internalized beliefs are hard to get rid of, not impossible. While it was hard, it was one of the foundations for my recovery. But it was still not enough. So I dug even deeper, and there I found it. Curled up and somewhere in my mind was fear. So much fear. Fear about being successful, fear about being a failure, fear about being happy, fear of trusting people, fear of not being able to love, fear of not being loved. There was so much fear. Too much, and whenever it went into my conscious mind and I was aware of it, it freaked the hell out of me and I didn't know how to handle it. The only way I knew to make it go away was binging and purging. And so there was a loop of destruction going on. The fear would come up and I would do something that would make dealing with fear impossible, and so it would get louder and louder and appear more frequently. On and on it went. Realizing this was incredibly comforting and humbling. But for the first time, things actually started making sense, because binging and purging in itself wasn't the problem. It was a way of dealing with a problem. And so if I wanted to remove bulimia from my life, I needed to find different ways to deal with my fears. And so another inner journey began. Yay! I faced my fears head on, and I started learning different ways to deal with them. And I, tried and tested to see what sticks and what makes the most sense to me. It wasn't easy. The work was endless and tireless, and there were many times where I defaulted back to binging and purging. But I was determined to let go of my bulimia. Now I knew what I had to do. There were no excuses anymore. I just had to keep trying. As of writing this essay, which I will remind you, all of my videos are previously essays on Substack. They're published there first. I was 5 months binge and purge free. I'm not anymore. I had a relapse recently. I am back on track, but I did have one day of relapse where I fell back into old behavior. Not proud of it, but I'm gonna write about it and do a video about it soon. But regardless, my fears still surface. And as I continue, growing as a person and challenging myself and putting myself out there and trying new things, my fears are still there, and sometimes new fears join them as well. The difference from before is that I don't see my fears as threatening anymore. I see them as an alarm going off, as something that's trying to protect me. I don't run away from them. I listen to them and I have a conversation with them, and I silence them without self-destructing in the process. Take a very deep look within yourself, and then look a little bit deeper. Whatever you're struggling with that you want to overcome, it was birthed by something else. Find it, and you will find a way to overcome the struggle that you're having. If you don't know where to start looking and how, let's have a conversation. As I mentioned, I had to do a lot of inner work to understand myself and to really get to know the source of my fears and what they looked like and what they wanted from me. And yet another work to figure out how to deal with them in more productive ways, and ways that also resonate with me, because not every way, not every tool out there will be suited for you and will make sense to you enough to keep up with it. Because it's also about consistency. Once we find the thing that helps us deal better, we need to be consistent in doing it. And it's not easy sometimes when this thing that we need to do is not really fitting with our life view or whatever it is. And so if you want somebody to support you on this journey, I would be happy to be there for you. You can book a non-binding call with me via the link in the description. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me, and I'll see you soon. Bye.